What?
Barbara, how are things today?
Everything is wonderful.
Good.
How are you?
Okay. This is a oral history of Barbara Rose conducted by May Sebel for the Dallas Jewish Historical Society on Monday, November the 16th, 2015. Okay. This is a video recording of Barbara Rose conducted by May Sebel on Monday, November 16th, 2015 for the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. Good afternoon, Barbara. How are you?
Everything's great. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you so much for doing this for us.
You're welcome.
We're interested in knowing about your background. So start as far back as you can with your grandparents or great-grandparents. Tell us where they were from, what kind of businesses they were in.
Okay. I don't know what type of business. Well, I do. My great-grandmother, who I did know, my grandfather's mother, lived in San Antonio. I do not know her name. We just knew her as Mammy. And we used to go over there every Sunday afternoon or something and play at the house. My grandmother, I think, is from East Orange, New Jersey, and she had two sisters. My mother had two sisters also. They were born and raised in San Antonio. I was born in San Antonio. My grandfather had some type of store where I guess they sold a lot to the Mexicans, is my understanding. I don't really remember because it's been a few years ago.
How long did you live in San Antonio?
I lived in San Antonio, I think, until I was about 5. And then at some point we moved to Arkansas, I guess for a year or so. I do not remember if that's before or after. I know that I started school in Amarillo. So therefore, I was not 6 at the beginning, so I had to go to a private first grade, if anybody remembers the way that used to be.
What was your dad doing that caused you to move quite a bit?
Well, I believe he was with different companies. As I said, I was so young at that point. We moved to Oklahoma City when I was in the 2nd grade. And then he worked for a department store. He did work for a department store, I know, in San Antonio. I believe he worked for Frost Brothers. But when we were in Oklahoma, he bought a store in Enid, so he would go back and forth between Oklahoma City and Enid. And then we moved to Enid when I was in the 6th grade. And he had a store there named Hersberg's. And then he would commute once a week, I believe, somewhere in Muskogee, I think, where he was doing some work then. But his family, he was born, as I understand, in Oklahoma City. And his father was killed in Paris, Texas. Apparently they were in the demolition business, and there was a huge fire, and they were, I guess, tearing down the buildings or whatever, and that's when he died. I never knew him. I never knew my grandmother either.
So your connection to your more distant past was through your mother's family?
Yes. I mean, I have cousins and so forth on Daddy's side, but there were more Kaufmans in San Antonio. So,
since you moved a lot and you were in small towns after leaving San Antonio, tell me something about your Jewish upbringing.
Well, in Oklahoma City, it certainly was a Jewish upbringing. I have a cousin who is 3 days older than I am. And we went to school together. When I moved to Enid, when I was in the 6th grade, I would commute to Oklahoma City I didn't have to go every weekend like everybody else did. I didn't have to go as often
To religious school?
to religious school, and I didn't have to go to services as often either. But we were the first confirmation class in the new temple in Oklahoma City.
What was the name of that temple?
Temple B'nai Israel. And it was very interesting because we were all girls, and you could hear us clomping down the concrete floor as we walked in. And we all had white, I guess it was Bibles or prayer books, I don't remember which I thought, my aunt had something to do with that. She thought that we should have white. But, so I was confirmed. We were confirmed at that point, I think, when we were 15. I think it's gotten to 16 now.
So you commuted whenever you could. Your folks took you into Oklahoma City
Right,
for temple.
or a friend of my cousin's
Uh-huh.
did, yeah.
Okay, and then following that, how did you continue your Jewish connections in a town like Enid?
Well, there was a nice Jewish boy who I said, Mother, do I have to go out with him? And she said, no, you just need to be nice to him. Because he was not one that I would prefer to go out with. But we would go to services for the High Holy Days. And we would go occasionally, but not a whole lot. I just knew that I was Jewish, and I would be that way.
And where did you, after high school, where did you go to college?
I went for 1 year to the University of Colorado, and then I transferred to the University of Texas. And my mother was so funny because I brought home bagels or something. She had no idea what a bagel was. She had never seen one and never had one. So I found that to be very interesting. Of course, they were moving around quite a bit at that point, so I guess she'd never really gotten into, the things that I was going into. But when I was at college, of course, all the Jewish girls could hardly wait to go out with non-Jewish boys. And it was hilarious. So I finally said to Mother, I said, if I'm going to go out, I'm going to have to date some boys that are not Jewish. And she looked at me and said, Barbara, what have you been dating all your life? Which is true, but I somehow knew I would marry a Jewish man, which I did.
So were you involved in a sorority?
I was in
University?
AE yes, I was in AE, and I needed it. When my boys went down there, they did not need it, but I needed it because I didn't know anybody. I was going into a totally strange atmosphere. The sorority at Texas was huge. At Colorado, it was not. It was very small. But one interesting thing at Colorado, they had something called ice water teas, and everybody visited every other sorority. And some of my non-Jewish friends in Oklahoma had written recommendations for me, which of course was not going to be done, but the people that got them would contact AE5 and tell them that they had heard, which I thought was very, very interesting. So,
And what did you study at UT?
I majored in mathematics, and then I became a computer programmer.
Tell us about your work as a computer programmer.
Well, I worked for American Petrofina, which at that point had something called Pink Air. It was just whatever, but it was very interesting, and I was working with the bosses, so I couldn't be really friendly with a lot of the girls at that point who were doing the cards that would feed into the computer. This goes back a very long time ago, and most people probably are not even aware of that.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, if for the information to go into the computer, they had to type these cards, which were about this big, and all the little holes in it was what it was reading into the computer. So it was really very interesting, and I had told my husband by that time, I said, one of these days, all the accounting firms are going to need programmers. And he thought I was nuts. And I said, well, if you're coming in to do an audit, And my boss says, show every credit card charge except every fifth one that is under $20 or something. We could do that and you wouldn't even know it because it would just be running through. So all the credit cards were done on these individual cards that went through. This was before, we were actually feeding the cards in that way. It was long before Apple computers and long before all of that, because by the time my oldest son was in grade school, the teacher said something to me and I said, "What is this?" It was an Apple computer. And I had never seen one. I mean, we didn't do any typing at that point. But it's been a very interesting experience with the computers, and I still enjoy it.
How did you meet your husband?
I was in Dallas. I was living with an aunt who lived here until school began. Then I get my other two roommates, and a cousin of her son, whatever, invited me. There was a Pi Tau Pi convention here in town, and he said, "Oh, you need to come." And I said, "Okay." And the interesting thing was, a friend of mine from Texas had gone out with Bill one night. She told me how nice it was. She also told me that she was getting engaged the next night, which means that that wasn't the deal. So I went out with Bill, and it just kind of went on from there.
Tell me a little bit about Pi Tau Pi.
I really don't know. I don't know that much about it. I guess it was just some sort of a men's fraternity type thing. It's graduate because he did not finish joining the fraternity in college. So it was just, I guess, a group of some type. Maybe it's a national. I don't know what the basis of it was or is.
How long did you continue working for Petrofina?
I worked for about a year and a half, and then I did some work for one of my bosses who was working somewhere else by that time.
And how have you continued using your computer skills?
Well, I was helping at school on the Apple, which was very interesting because we were feeding data in with a tape machine, and everything had to be perfect so that it could understand it. But I have continued. The kids had computers, and I now use a computer quite a bit. I do a lot of database work and reservations and all sorts of interesting things on the computer, most of which I've taught myself because I really have not been back to school except for a short time that I was at IBM learning how to use what would now be called a mainframe.
Tell me about your organizational work in Dallas.
Well, when I moved to Dallas, I asked a good friend of mine, May, what I should join. And she said I should join National Council of Jewish Women and Temple Emmanuel Sisterhood. And I joined both. I was working and didn't have time really to do anything, but I paid my dues and did that. And when the time came that I could do some work, I would do some stuff with Sisterhood. I would do some stuff with NCJW. And I've done volunteer work for Jewish Family Service. I've done stuff for the Historical Society, and I've helped a number of agencies as much as I can if they want me.
What is your hobby or hobbies?
Well, my biggest hobby is knitting, and I love to do that. And I'm taking cruises now with a group that it's with a particular company. The fellow that takes them owns the company, and it goes through various knit shops. But we travel here and there, and it's been interesting because I met people from all over the country, and a woman from Canada is a very good friend of mine. So all of that makes things very interesting. I love to travel. We didn't do a lot. We didn't do as much as we wanted to because Bill was an amputee and it was very hard for him to get around. But I also love to play bridge when I get the opportunity.
How have you seen, or what are the changes that you have seen in the Dallas Jewish community? You've been here a long time.
Yes, I have. And some things don't change. I mean, sisterhood, I still see the same people there that I saw 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And sometimes it's hard to get people to change, to want to do more. I remember at one point they asked me to be on a committee, and they said, okay, we need to get more young members. We need to decide what we need to do to get the members. And I said, excuse me, if you want to find out how to get young members, you don't decide what to do. You go ask them. Oh, we never thought about that. So the powers that be keep wanting to be the powers that be. National Council of Jewish Women changes more. They, since they don't have a basis any place, because sisterhood works through temple, with temple, and so forth. NCJW works with national, but it's very interesting what they do, and they go out in the community, and hopefully they get projects and so forth going, and maybe eventually they'll be taken over by a different entity or by a whole different group, which is the whole point of having these projects, to help other people. So it's always an interesting thing, and I really believe that volunteer is largely social, because that's how you get to meet people. Oh, I forgot about the Vogel Alcove I worked for a long time, and the Dallas Furniture Bank. I'm still working there also.
Anything else you would like to add?
No, I really can't, think of anything. It's been interesting. It still is interesting. But
Well, thank you very, very much.
thank you.
Appreciate
I enjoyed
it.
it.